Hello viewer, a warm welcome to Elimu TV where you watch and learn. I'm your biology teacher, Madam Christine Okoth. Today we're going to have our fifth lesson, Biology, Form 3. Our topic is still on classification 2, and today we're going to discuss about kingdom Plantae. Previously we looked at kingdom Fungi. So this is a preview of what we're going to learn today in our lesson. First, we're going to review the assignment. We're going to have a recap of the 5 kingdoms. We're going to look at the general characteristic of plants. We're going to look at the 3 divisions of plants. Then we're going to still look at the examples of the specific divisions. We're going to look at the specific characteristics of organisms in Bryophyta. We're going to look at the importance of Bryophyta, and lastly, we're going to give you an assignment. So let us first start by the assignment that you are to do, and the assignment was practical. You're supposed to grow a mold using a bread. So I hope you did that and you carried out all the steps of the practical assignment. Now the question was observe and draw the final product. That was after keeping your bread in a damp area and a warm area for 48 hours, which was the least hours. So you're supposed to observe what has happened to the bread and draw the final product. Then you're also supposed to explain why the final product is different and what has led to the formation of that additional organism. So the mold which you are growing, it grew on the bread because it had favorable conditions for the growth. So what were these favorable conditions? There was moisture. When you sprinkle the bread, that was moisture, you sprinkled with water. Then the warm temperatures that you kept the mold, the bread to grow in, that one is also a favorable condition for the growth of mold. Then there was also nutrient from the bread which has some sugar content. So the 3 conditions were present, that is moisture, warm temperature and nutrient. So that one helped the mold to grow on the bread. So by drawing, I expect something roughly like this. There's a bread there growing, then you have the spores, we have the stolon, you have the sporangium and the sporangiophore. So that is just roughly a rough sketch of what you're supposed to draw after observing the bread and the mold which has grown on top of the bread. So now let us look at the Plantae kingdom. Remember, we have 5 kingdoms, and the largest kingdom is the Monera, which is composed of bacteria. That one we had discussed. Then we also looked at the kingdom Protoctista, which is made of the algae. We looked at the fungi, whereby we have the mold and the yeast. And today we're going to look at the Plantae kingdom. So if you like to remember all those 5 kingdoms, there's a mnemonic which you can use. It goes like bees prefer finding, puber, alive. So if you take the first letters in each word, the B stands for bacteria, which is in the Monera kingdom. Then P for Protoctists. Then we have F for fungi, P for Plantae kingdom, and A for Animalia kingdom. So if you ever forget the kingdoms, just remember the statement, bees prefer finding, puber, alive. So today we're going to discuss at the plant kingdom. So if you just look at the plants, what is the main thing that makes something, an organism, to be identified as a plant and not an organism? So you can think of those features which makes a plant to be distinctively called a plant but not an animal. We have so many species of plant. From the flowers, we have the pumpkin plants, we have the watermelon plants, we have the muskmelon plants, we have the potatoes. There are so many variety of species in the plant kingdom. But the question is, what are the main characteristics that will make an organism to be called a plant? So let us look at this characteristic. So these are just the general characteristics of plants. What is that thing that identifies an organism as a plant? First of all, they are multicellular. It means that they are made up of many cells, compared to the bacteria, which are unicellular, meaning that they are just made up of one cell. Next thing that identifies organism as a plant, they are eukaryotic cell. You can look at our illustration. They have an organized nucleus with a nuclear envelope. So you can identify where the nucleus is, the yellowish part, then the pinkish part there is what we call the nuclear envelope. So they have a well-organized nucleus with a nuclear envelope. Then they have a membrane-bound structure like the mitochondrium, which are found within the cell. The third thing that identifies an organism as a plant is their cells are differentiated to form tissues and organs such as the leaves, the stem, and the roots. So the plant has different parts which consist of the leaves, the stems, and the roots, each one of them having a specific role to play in the plant. Still looking at the general factors, the general characteristics of plants, they have chlorophyll. So that is the green pigment which is responsible for the process of photosynthesis. So a plant will always have the chlorophyll. It means that they are autotrophs. They are in a position to make their own food, which is quite the opposite with animals. They are heterotrophs. They cannot make their own food because they do not have the green pigment in them. So they depend on the plants and other animals. So another distinctive characteristic of the plant, the cell wall is made up of cellulose, which gives the cells a definite shape. So in a plant, we have the cell membrane that allows the passage of materials in and out of the cell. In addition to the cell membrane in the plant, we have what we call the cell wall. So the cell wall is made up of this material we call the cellulose. It helps to give the cells a definite shape. Another characteristic of plants, they do not move their whole body, but they move part of their bodies partially. They are not in position to dislocate their bodies as in animals. They can move from one place to another in a very short time. These plants cannot move, but they move partially through climbing. So we have different types of plants which do the climbing. They have what we call the climbers. For example, the grapevine, as in our illustration, we have the pea plant, which also does the climbing. It supports itself as it goes up towards the source of light. Then we have this plant we normally call the money plant. So all these, there are so many other examples, but just these are few. So all these plants, they cannot move their bodies, the whole body, but they move just part of their bodies, but in a slow position. So the final characteristic, a general characteristic in the plants, is in terms of reproduction. So they reproduce by formation of either the seeds or the spores or the vegetative production. So in our illustration, we have like the life cycle of a flowering plants. So there are flowering plants and there are non-flowering plants. So but they both do undergo reproduction. So for example, here we have a plant. First of all, it has to germinate. There are some favorable conditions that will help the plants to germinate. Then the plants develop and they reach a point of maturity. Then afterwards, the flowers will blossom. When they blossom, it means they are going to release the flowers. And the flowers are the ones which are responsible for the pollination. And pollination, this is the transfer of pollen grains from anthers to the stigma, either of the same plant or to another different plant. So after the pollination, the plant will undergo fertilization, and finally the seeds and the fruits are going to form. And when the seeds are formed, the seeds will be dispersed either by other animals or by themselves using the agents of pollinations like the wind. So that is just the life cycle of a flowering plant. So we're just looking at the reproduction as part of a general characteristic of the plants. So from the plants, the main kingdom is what we call the PLANTAE. Now, from the plants, from the kingdom, we normally go to the phylum, but in the case of plants, we call it the division. So the second part, just after kingdom, we call the division now in plants. So the plants are grouped basing on the presence or the absence of the vascular bundles. The vascular bundles are the ones which are responsible for the transportation of water and mineral salts. So they can be grouped according to their presence or absence of the vascular bundles, or they can be grouped basing on the production of seeds or the spores for reproduction. So we have the three divisions of plants. The first one is what we call the BRYOPHYTA, we have the PTERIDOPHYTA, and we have lastly the SPERMATOPHYTA. So today in our lesson we are going to exclusively discuss about BRYOPHYTA. So what is this BRYOPHYTA? So the bryophyte is a traditional name which is used to refer to all embryophytes, which means they are land plants. So these types of plants, the bryophytes, they do not have true vascular tissues and are therefore called non-vascular plants. So they do not have the xylem and the phloem tissue. We have our beautiful teacher here trying to emphasize on what bryophytes are. So bryophytes, they're also called in quotes the amphibians of the plant kingdoms. Why? Because these plants can live in soil, but they are dependent on water for their sexual reproduction. So they have two habitats. They can live on the land and they can also live on water, but mainly they have to come on water for sexual reproduction. They usually grow on damp surfaces of walls and bark of the trees, so they form carpet-like growth on the surface. So example of this bryophyta, we have the most very common, maybe at one time you have looked at a leaf, at a tree, and you have observed the green thing that which is growing at the back of the tree. And that one you can try to peel it off, it comes out as a carpet. That's why we say it forms a carpet-like growth on the surface. Another example of a bryophyta is what we call the liverwort. And another example we have what we call the hornwort. Now let us look at the characteristics of bryophytes. One, they are very tiny plants. They are green in color. So if a plant is green in color, what's the first thing that comes in our mind? It contains chlorophyll, of course. So the green pigment is in them. So which means it's very obvious it is used in the process of photosynthesis. So these plants, they have the green color in them and they undergo photosynthesis. It means they are autotrophs. They are in position to make their own food. Secondly, they have no vascular tissues. Therefore, water and dissolved nutrients move through by diffusion or by osmosis. So these plants, they do not have what we call the xylem. This is a tissue which is responsible for the uptake of water. They also do not have the phloem tissues, which is responsible for the uptake of mineral salts. So by the virtue of them not having these tissues, it means that they are going to move their nutrients and water through diffusion or through osmosis. Another characteristic of bryophyte is the fact that they do not have the true roots. So they have tiny root-like structures which are known as the rhizoids. So these are not true roots. So looking at our illustration, we have an example, a display of the rhizoids. So they anchor themselves in the soil by root-like structures which are called the rhizoid. So in number 2 there, you can look at the structure, that is what we call the rhizoid. They are the false roots in the bryophytes. Another characteristic of bryophyte, they have tiny leaves with no cuticles. Therefore, most of them live in damp places. Like if you have walked around and observed, mostly where there are water bodies or in damp places, you find this green, there is something green which is growing on the surface of either the rocks there or the trees or on the ground. So this is what we call, that is the moss. They normally like growing where they are in damp places and wet places. Another characteristic of bryophytes is in terms of their reproduction. So they undergo either asexual or sexual reproduction. So asexual reproduction in most plants, so a moss is an example of a bryophyte. So the spore capsule, the capsule is the upper part. The spore capsule is full of spores that must mature. So inside the capsule, enclosed inside are the spores. So once they mature, the spore caps, they come off releasing the spores. So they will burst out, then release the spores. When these spores germinate, they germinate in the soil, maybe let's say in land or in moist soil. So by this, it means that there are other organisms which are going to come out from the spores which have burst out. So that is the first type of reproduction they undergo. Then the second is sexual reproduction. This is by fusion of the male and the female gametes. So the male reproduce the male will reproduce a sperm cell, and the female will also reproduce an egg cell. So they will fuse together to form a zygote. Then a mature sporophyte, once the sporophyte is mature, it will burst out and the spores will come out. Then they will mature up and form the gametes. So let us have a video to illustrate this sexual reproduction in bryophyte, and in this video we're going to look at sexual reproduction in a moss plant.
Mosses alternate between the haploid gametophyte and the diploid sporophyte during their life cycle. The sporophyte generation in bryophytes develops from the gametophyte. Sporophytes receive much of their nutrition from the gametophyte. Spores are produced by meiosis in the capsule of the sporophyte. The spore capsule ripens, bursts, and releases the spores. A spore germinates to form a protonema. The antheridium develops on the male gametophyte. Sperm form within the antheridium. The archegonium develops on the female gametophyte. An egg forms within the archegonium. Sperm are released from the antheridium and swim to the archegonium. Fertilization takes place inside the archegonium and a zygote is formed. The zygote divides by mitosis to form a new sporophyte in the form of a stalk and capsule.
Now you have watched that video on sexual reproduction by the fusion of the males and the female gametes. So now we have talked about the characteristics of bryophytes. Well, now let us look at the importance of bryophytes. So the first important, it is used as a preservative agent. So the bryophytes, they have a very excellent power to absorb moisture and can act as a good preservative agent. They do not only help to prevent the food, but they are also used to help to preserve dead bodies. So in our illustration here, you can see there's an image there of a dead organism, preferably it's a man. So this preservative has been made using the bryophyte. So they are used as preservative. They can either preserve the plant species or the dead bodies. Another importance of bryophytes, they help in prevention of soil erosion because they form a carpet-like structure. So when they form a carpet-like structure, it means that the soil erosion is going to be very less because they cover up the soil which will have been carried away maybe by the winds. So they help in the prevention of soil erosion. Another importance of bryophytes, they are used as fuel in developing countries. They are used mainly in the production of heat and methane. So these organics, they're just organic compounds. When they undergo decomposition, they can be used to make the methane. So the methane that normally we feed on our gases when we are cooking, so just know that some of them are made from bryophytes. Another importance, they are used as a source of food and shelter in the invertebrates. So the invertebrates can eat bryophytes. They can either lay their eggs and shelter in them. So they can either be used as a source of food or they also provide shelter for the invertebrates organisms. Another importance of bryophyte is in the fiber industry. So when these bryophytes are mixed with wool, they can either be used to make the clothes. Then they are also used in making linings in diapers because they improve the absorbing power. They can also be used to make the hiking boots to absorb the odor and the moisture. The good boots that you use from the butter shops or wherever you buy them, they are mostly made with the inner lining, which is made so that it can be able to absorb the odor and the moisture. Then also in the making of the diapers, an example, the Huggies, which is very common. So the lining is used because it has a high absorbing power. Another importance of bryophyte is in skin treatment. So the ash of moss mixed with honey and fat, it treats cuts, burns, and wounds. Another importance of bryophytes is in the production of medicine. This is mostly incorporated in China. So they are in the business of making medicines made up of the bryophytes organism. For example, the medicine for tonsillitis made using these organisms we call bryophytes. So that has been our lesson for today. I'm going to leave you with this assignment. Question number 1. State the 3 main features of division BRYOPHYTA. Number 2. State 2 examples of plants in division BRYOPHYTA. And the last question is, what is the difference in structure of the plant and that of an animal cell? So that has been our lesson for today. Remember, you can write to us any question, any feedback, any clarification you'd like to know more. Our SMS number is 40007. Our Facebook page is Elimu TV. And our Twitter handle is @elimu_ke. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to Elimu TV. I have been your teacher, Madam Christine Okoth.